Hello students, welcome back to this course on visual semantics for visual communication. In our last two lectures, we learned about human communication as such and human cooperative communication. In today's lecture, we will focus on the model for human cooperative communication. So, there is a model in place for human cooperative communication, and today we will focus on that particular model. So, if you remember, in the first lecture we talked about there is a communicator or the producer of a particular information, and then that is being received by a receiver. So, we talked about communication. When we talked about communication, we talked about the communicator or the producer and the receiver of some kind of information which takes place. Now, the model for cooperative communication, the model actually relies on this very preliminary diagram and then details out more how this communication is happening, what is happening within the communicator, what is happening within the receiver, and what is happening across. So, basically when we are talking about this in total, we are getting a model for human cooperative communication. So, remember this key aspect always, that whenever a human cooperative communication is taking place, it is taking place in terms of a communicator or a producer of that information and the receiver or the audience of that information. In many cases, you might be designing various entities or artifacts of visual communication in future. Always keep in mind that there are always these two entities which are playing in the background, which is the designer or the creator of that particular visual communication, and there is a receiver of that particular visual communication. And not only that, there is a process which is happening within the designer, there is a process which is happening within the receiver, and there is a process which is happening across. So, we need to silo it out and understand three of them separately. Only then the understanding for visual semantics, or which means the understanding of the meaning of the visual domain, will be clear. Otherwise, there will be a gap in understanding that. We cannot take one side and then analyze visual semantics for that matter, or visual communication, or for that matter any entity which is created by human beings. So, there is a creator's aspect we need to analyze, there is a receiver's aspect we need to analyze, and then we need to also analyze how these two are communicating or talking to with each other or interacting with each other, or there is a flow from one to another. So, we will exactly look into that into the next slide. If you remember, in our last presentation we talked about three motives of human communication. There is requesting, there is informing, and there is sharing. Why I am repeating this is because in the next diagram that you will see talking about human communication, these three come into picture. So, if you look into the next diagram, which is the model for human communication, cooperative communication rather. So, now we will look into detail into the communicator's aspect. So, if you look into the diagram, it broadly has three segments. One is to do with the communicator, one is to do with the receiver, and one is where there is an interaction being happening. So, if we now look into the communicator, we see the first aspect of communicator is to do with individual goals. So, the communicator, so if you look into the communicator or the producer of information, we will notice that the first aspect which comes into picture is the individual goals. Many a times individual goal could be replaced by an organizational goal as well, because as you understand, in today's world many a times various organizations have taken the leadership, or rather the commercial aspect of producing designed goods, and that includes visual communication design as well. So it could be an individual need, or it could be an organizational need or goal based on which the communicator starts the communication. So first we start with a goal which is there in prevalence. Many a times that goal is derived, many a times this goal is derived from other channels. Many a times the goal is derived from other channels, such as the market or the users. So it may so happen that the communicator starts with a goal, and that goal has actually arrived from the receiver. So it may have originated from the receiver, or it may have originated from other source. So both are possible in this particular case. So the communicator starts with a goal, and that goal is derived, the goal or the requirement is derived from that which has been derived from the receivers or the users at the end, or it could be from some other source, which could be a market research, or it could be an expert opinion, or many other sources as it could be. So it starts from this particular goal, and then we look into the diagram again. So these individual goals then start rolling into a social intention. So this is very, very important that we try to understand that these particular goals take shape into some kind of a social intention. So we already talked about various intentions or the shared intentions in human cooperative communication, and the shared intention actually gives way to a cooperative communication mode. This is exactly what is happening here, that first the goals have been derived, the goals have been understood, analyzed, and which slowly takes form of some kind of a social intention. Until and unless this social intention is clear within the communicator, the communication might not be successful to a great extent. And what happens as soon as we start realizing the social intentions, we start expressing that. We start expressing that to some extent. We talk about it, or we let out some kind of questions or intentions are being expressed, and this intention is being expressed to the receiver. Many a times this expression is being comprehended by the receiver, and as I said, it can roll back to other entities as well. Here we are talking about a communicator receiver kind of a model, but this could be extended to other model where you have a communicator, receiver, and other sources or other entities kind of a situation. Say for example, you are designing a poster for your for a program in your college or organization, and for that you have set up some goals. So these goals could have arrived to you from the hosts of the program, from the event organizers of the program. So that goal has been derived from somewhere, and once you have analyzed the goal, the next level would be to understand the social intention. So there would be some kind of social intention which would be playing in the background within the communicator, based on which he will try to express something, and this expression can roll back to the receiver. Many a times it rolls back to the receiver, or it rolls back to other sources. Here in this case it may roll back to his peers, or it may roll back to the organizers, who might respond to various expressions arising out of the social need. So, for example, this poster design kind of a scenario, the social intentions is could be, are we trying to help someone, are we trying to cooperate someone, are we trying to make a persuasive impact on someone, are we trying to change their behavior about this program, are we trying to pull people, attract them to this program, or are we trying to force people attend this program, are we trying to establish a connection between the organizer and the receiver. So various, there could be multiple social intentions which might be emerging out of it, and there would be various expressions. The expressions is in terms of questions, the expression is in terms of communication through various modes. There could be preliminary drafts being formed, and that rolls back to the user, and the user comprehends that to some extent. So if we look at the user or the receiver, these expressions need to be comprehended. It goes for a comprehension, and only then some action could be taken at a receiving end. So this is first level of communication which is happening between the communicator and the receiver. So the first level or the degree of communication happens at a level of social intention. We are trying to understand the social shared common intent which cuts across both the communicator and the receiver, and this gets communicated through some kind of an expression, and that expression needs to be comprehended, otherwise there would be a failure in this particular degree of communication. So hope this particular part of the model is clear, where we are trying to establish social intentions and its communication. Let's look at now what is the next level of communication which takes place. Once the social intention is realized, the next level of communication which happens is that of communicative intentions. So once you have understood the social intention, so if we look at the social intentions, these are the shared or common intent. So we try to understand the social intentions by a shared or common intent, and this is more of a analytical phase. So this is more of an analytical phase where you are trying to understand the social intent and you communicate for that accordingly. The next level of communication that happens within the communicator is the communicational intentions. So in case of communicational intentions, we are trying to create. So in communicational intentions, we are letting out various signals or various artifacts. So when it comes in terms of communicational intention, we try to look at how these social intentions now would be communicated. What are the various modes of communication, and more than that, what is the intent of that communication? That is very, very crucial when it comes in terms of design or visual communication design as such, because you are trying to first set up the goals. Many a cases we understand we gather some requirement and we start designing, but what is happening step by step within the communicator and at the receiver or some other entity is, after you have set the goal, you are actually trying to develop a social intent within yourself, and the social intent cannot be alienated from the social needs or the social context which we talked about, context, experiences and assumptions. So this whole social intention relies on all this, and based on that now you will start developing your communicational intents which are let out in terms of signals. So again, if we look at this particular diagram, so this is communicated in terms of various signals, and these signals are nothing but designed entities, which is very, very important for us to understand that at this level the communicator starts letting out signals, and that signal is received by the receiver, and there is a cooperative reasoning which takes place. So, these signals, if you look at this particular text, so these signals which are being let out by the communicator is received, so is received, and there is a reasoning which takes place. So, these signals or these particular artifacts would fail if the receiver fails to reason it and fails to put it into their framework of cooperative reasoning. So, if there is a lack of cooperation there is a lack of shared intentionality, there is a lack of shared social intentionality, there is a lack of shared communicational intentionality, the efficiency of communication will drastically reduce. So, as you can understand now why understanding this model is so very important, and hence designing or the understanding of visual communication would be vastly enhanced because of this knowledge. To give you an example, again taking the example of the poster, say you have developed a preliminary poster or you have developed a draft version of the poster, you call in certain audience, a group of audience, or select some sample from the group of audience, and then you show this particular poster with certain signals or artifacts being put into it. Say you make 2-3 options, which is a very common practice in a organizational setup or in a industrial setup when it comes to designing for visual communication. 2 or 3 options are being produced, and then they are shown to different samples, sample groups or sample individuals, and then feedback is received. Now, it is important to understand that the feedback is received based on what? The feedback is received based on their cooperative reasoning, the cooperative reasoning of the users or the samples who are viewing the signals that you have created. Hope this is clear from this particular diagram. The signals are being developed, which could be half done, which receives the receiver, and they utilize their cooperative reasoning for understanding that, and then it moves on to cross checking it with various comprehension which they match with the social expressions, and thereafter they take action. So, I am moving back on this diagram top down, but let me finish the final or the last step which happens at the communicator end after communicative intention is there are some referential intention that is being plugged and played before it reaches to the receiver. So, once the communicator sets up the social intention or understands the social intention, understands the communicational intention, the last but not the least step at a communicator end is to understand some referential intentions. What would you refer to? What would you point to? That is very crucial when in terms of communication. So, in this poster example again, what are you trying to point? What are you trying to hint? If you remember that bicycle story, I just pointed towards that bicycle and the whole notion of communication was taking into place just by a single pointing. Here you have a poster, no one is going to talk about it, there is going to be some graphic, maybe few text, and this is actually going to point. It is actually trying to point and tell you something and communicate about it. So, this is the referential intention which the communicator needs to understand, and based on that he would let out some references or point for that matter. Pointing here is not by a physical pointing, but in your communication what it is referring to or pointing or hinting into or emphasizing it to, and then this particular pointing is taken into cognition by the receiver by taking reference. So, see how important it is now from this diagram that what after analyzing the entire goal, social intention, communicative intention and referential intention, what you point to, if that is not received by the receiver, that the receiver is not even looking at the bicycle that you are pointing to, the whole communication fails, the whole assumption fails, the experience that based on which you are relying on this particular communication fails. So, for an effective, efficient communication, this particular model holds very good in terms of human cooperative communication. So, I will summarize what I have discussed so far in this diagram in a particular order. So, the individual goals are being taken shape, or the individual goals give way to social intentions. The social intentions then create some kind of communicative intention within the communicator. The communicator sets out signals or start developing signals or artifacts to the receiver, and the receiver receives it with a cooperative reasoning. They have to use their reasoning and knowledge to decipher those signals and then comprehend that. And the last level is the referential intention, where you are referring something, and that happens in terms of pointing or emphasizing certain things, and that at a receiver end the task is dealt with by taking reference of that. So, in other words, what is happening at the receiver's end is the receiver takes reference of what is being referred to by the communicator, then he utilizes his cooperative reasoning for understanding those references. Thereafter, he comprehends that using the social intentions as well, which has been expressed. So, that helps in comprehension, otherwise the comprehension won't work out. So, here the cooperative reasoning is mixed with the social intentions. So, the receiver can understand this is the social intention. Oh, so I need to participate because that will benefit me, for example, in this particular program. So, now his comprehension, his reasoning is mapped with what has been expressed in this particular poster, and hence that whole thing will lead or will make the receiver take some action. In this case, he will join the program. That is where the success of your poster lies, that this particular individual, after looking at your communication design, takes an action which is intended. The social intention is fulfilled, the communication intention is fulfilled, and the referential intention is fulfilled. So, this is the cooperative model which is taking place between the communicator and the receiver, where they are communicated through 3 different channels. And notice that this whole domain of communicator, receiver, processing of the information, propagation of the information, receiving, communicating, producing, is happening at the common context, at the common experiential level, and at the common assumptions. If the context, experience and assumption are vastly varied, they don't map with each other, they don't have a shared intentionality in terms of social intents, in terms of communication intents, in terms of referential intents, probably this communication model won't work. So, the whole framework of this model is based on these 3 triangles which I have mentioned in one of the lectures, which talks about the context, the experiences and the assumptions. So, these 3 have to be at par, only then this works out. Many a times we talk about across cultural failure, or there is a cultural difference, or there is a community level difference in understanding of communication, or there has been a mismatch of information communication, there was a gap. This gap occurs because of this particular model. So, if you look at this model, the gap might occur at any of these levels. So, there could be a gap occurring at an expression level, at a signal level. So, what kind of social intentions have been expressed, what kind of signals have been given out, and what are the references which were referred to. So, they might break at all these points, and this happens obviously because of the cultural difference. Now, we will go further with this model to look into some of the other aspects, is where these three communicational modes are treated as the tools for communication. So, wherever we are talking about with different tools, we talk about these three tools which come very effective for communication designers. Now, there is also another very interesting aspect to any kind of communication or codified communication. Whenever there is a communication happening in an information, we talked about expression, we talked about references, we talked about intentions, but this is all happening in form of some kind of a code, in form of some kind of an information or a data, and this code is always decoded and it relies on something which is more conceptual. So, if you look at this particular statement, the linguistic code rests on a non-linguistic infrastructure of intentional understanding and common conceptual ground, which is in fact logically primary. So, what it essentially means is any kind of linguistic or verbal or non-verbal codification relies on something which is essentially non-linguistic, which is essentially some other code. So, to give you an example which I have shown in this slide as well, when we refer to a linguistic code is he, she, it, right. So, we refer to say a table as it is a table, right. So, it is a linguistic entity, but if you look at it very deeply, it is relying on something which is very non-linguistic in nature. A table is non-living, a table is stationary, and hence it becomes it. It is being codified as it when we refer to, whereas he is codified to a living entity who is a male and with whom I can communicate to a certain extent, only then I am referring to him as he. For different other languages, there are different ways of representing this he as well. So, this keeps on varying from culture to culture, from language to language, from groups to groups, community to community, as I have told you in the very first lecture. But the idea here is any codification which takes place relies on something which is non-linguistic in nature, and more interestingly, it relies on some other existing code. For example, I always give this example in the class that say if I tap this table 3 times, and that means that you have to stand up. This is a code that I am setting today, but this is relying on a different code which is the linguistic code I am using. So, from tomorrow if I tap twice and you stand up, that code is understood, that is a new code which has been set, but it is relying on an existing code. So, what is important for us to understand that over course of time, coding and encoding changes, and it always relies on some pre-existing codification, and based on that the decodification takes place. So, very important to understand what you are going to take as a predefined code for developing newer codes. So, another very important aspect which comes in terms of linguistics is why we are talking about shared intentions. So, I will very quickly go through this slide where linguistic discourse is always shared. There has to be common conventions to be reached at. So, essentially it means that that has to be shared in nature. So, a common linguistic discourse relies on shared conventions, everyone has to agree to it. Essentially what it means is we both know together that we are both using a convention in the same manner. So, the idea is both you and me know that we are using this particular convention in a particular fashion, and hence it is shared amongst you and me and conventionalized, and then creates the particular linguistic domain for that. So, this is how we are talking about a shared intention for that matter. This also brings in the fact that visual communication needs to be learned, people needs to be trained in understanding. It is as good as understanding a language. Visual language is also a language which is shared, which has common conventions, which has common intentions, and which need to be realized by both parties. So, it needs some kind of education, it needs some kind of visual literacy associated with it. So, there are different courses, different other courses available for visual literacy, which predominantly talks about visual literacy in particular, but here the point which is highlighted is it's a shared activity, it's a shared notion, and hence it needs to be learned, understood and cognized. If we look at some of the evidences that how this shared communication takes place, there are various evidences which takes place, where ontogenetic evidences, phylogenetic evidences. Ontogenetic is development of a self or development of a particular individual over the course of lifetime. So, we see a lot of developments happening in terms of communication, where we talk about shared intentionality, and all the aspects we have discussed so far is happening within an individual over course of time. It happens phylogenetically, where it is the interaction with other individuals. It's an interspecies developmental aspect. So, we have seen that has happened over human civilization, over course of our human evolution, that has taken place. If we look at other evidences, we use hollow phrase. Children many a times use hollow phrase, a single word meaning different types of things. So, hollow phrases, gesture word combination, grammatical dimensions, all of these are evidences that human cooperative communication works in this particular model. So, there are various evidences which are also available with us, which justifies the model for human cooperative communication. Not only that, how the codes work, and this works in a systematic approach. So, we understand now the science or the hidden aspects which happen within the subject. And with this we come with some of the communicative challenges as well. So, there are three broad communicative challenges. One is the identifying of the references. So, as you can understand, one of the major challenge which will happen between the communicator and the receiver is identifying the references. Then it is the structuring. How do you sequence different information, different communication happening all the time. So, there communicator receiver is bombarded with lot of information in a sequence. So, how do you structure that? So, one aspect is taking note of the references, another aspect is how do you structure all of this together, how do you put a logic towards it and then look at it, and then how do you express that, what is the uniqueness or distinguishable factors which distinguishes or expresses your intentions with someone else's intentions. So, that more or less covers the various communicative challenges which are associated with human cooperative communication. So, that brings us to the end of our model for human cooperative communication, and we will meet you in the next lecture. Thank you.